Sit. He didn't look at her when he said it, just pulled out the chair across from his at the kitchen table and went back to staring at the piece of paper in his hand. Mirabel sat. The chair scraped against cracked linoleum. The kitchen smelled of burnt coffee and something older, something that had been living in the walls a long time. She looked at her hands in her lap. The knuckles were still red from scrubbing the McAllister's floors that morning. The job she'd just lost because Mrs. McAllister's daughter had come home from college and needed something to do with herself. The man across the table, Calloway Stroud, had not looked at her once since she'd walked through the door of the Haskell County Employment Office 40 minutes ago. He had read her file, asked 3 questions, told her to follow him to his truck. She had followed him because she had $11 in her coat pocket, and her landlord had taped a notice to her door that morning. "My property is 8 hours north," he said. "I need someone to manage the house. Cook, maintain inventory, handle supply orders." "You'd be on site," Mirabel repeated. "You'd live there." He finally looked up. His eyes were a pale, washed-out gray, the kind of color that made it hard to tell if he was angry or just empty. He was somewhere in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, with a jaw that looked like it had been hewn rather than grown, and hands that made the sheet of paper between them look fragile. He wore a flannel shirt with a frayed collar and work boots that had not been cleaned in a long time. That a problem? 8 hours north of where? North of here. Mirabel looked at the paper. It was her employment record. 3 jobs in 14 months. None of them ending well, though none of them ending by her choice either. "What's the pay?" He named a number. It was more than she'd made in the last 6 months combined. "What's the catch?" she asked. Calloway folded the paper in half and set it on the table between them. "No catch. Property needs managing. You need work." He stood up. "We leave tomorrow morning, 5 a.m. He walked out of the kitchen. The screen door banged shut behind him. Mirabel sat alone in the empty room for a long moment. She thought about the $11. She thought about the notice on her door. She thought about her mother, who had told her all her life that the worst thing you could do was accept help from a stranger. Her mother had also died with nothing, so she was in the parking lot at 4:58 the next morning. The truck was a battered F-250, dark green, with a cracked passenger side mirror held in place by electrical tape. Calloway was already there, loading 2 wooden crates into the bed, with the efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times and expected no assistance. He didn't acknowledge her arrival. She climbed into the cab. The seat was cold, and the heater took 20 minutes to produce anything resembling warmth. They drove north out of Haskell as the sky went from black to a bruised purple. He didn't talk. Mirabel had brought a paperback. She read 40 pages before she noticed that the highway had become a 2-lane road, and then the 2-lane road had become a gravel track, and the gravel track was narrowing into something that barely qualified as a path at all. Scrub pine pressed in on both sides. The sky, what she could see of it through the canopy, had gone the color of old nickels. "How much further?" she asked. "Few hours." She went back to her book. She didn't actually read any of it. The temperature dropped around noon. She could see her breath. She checked her phone and found she had no signal, which she had been expecting. But the reality of it was different from the expectation. She put the phone back in her pocket and watched a hawk float in slow circles above the tree line. "Is there a town up here?" "No, nearest one. 60 miles. She absorbed this. "You have internet?" Calloway glanced at her sidelong. It was the first time he'd actually looked at her since they'd left. "Satellite. Slow power?" "Generator. Backup propane." Mirabel nodded slowly. She was doing arithmetic in her head. 60 miles from a town. No cell service. A man she'd met 36 hours ago. She thought about the $11 again and decided arithmetic was not always the most useful tool. The road got worse in the afternoon. What had been gravel became 2 dirt tracks pressed into the earth by repeated tire passages, with a ridge of weeds growing up the center. The truck rocked and lurched. Mirabel braced her hand against the door, trying not to let her teeth click together on the rougher stretches. Calloway didn't adjust his speed. He drove the rutted track like it was a highway, one hand loose on the wheel, staring straight ahead at nothing in particular. "Does the road get better?" "No. Has it always been like this?" "Yes." She looked out the window. The pines were taller here, their trunks wide and dark, the light between them thin and gray. The ground under the trees was carpeted in brown needles. No undergrowth, nothing soft about it. She had grown up in the flatlands, and the scale of these trees, the sheer vertical mass of them, made her feel like something very small that had wandered somewhere it wasn't meant to be. They stopped once, just before dusk, in a wide spot where a creek crossed the track through a shallow concrete ford. Calloway cut the engine, got out, checked something under the hood, checked the creek level, got back in. Never said why they stopped, never said it was okay to get out. Mirabel got out anyway, because her back had fused into something solid and immovable, and she stood on the bank of the creek and watched the black water slide over pale rocks, and told herself this was fine. This was fine. Her boots were not waterproof. She hadn't known she would need waterproof boots. When she got back in the truck, her feet were wet, and her socks were cold. She didn't say anything. Calloway didn't say anything. He started the engine, and they kept going. It was full dark when the road ended. Not tapered off, not became a driveway. Ended. In a dense wall of mature pine that should not have had a clearing in it but did, and in the clearing sat what Mirabel could only see by the truck's headlights. A gate. Not a cattle gate, not a chain-link fence with a padlock. A gate of black iron. 12 feet tall, with 2 stone columns flanking it, each one anchored deep into the earth with the settled permanence of something built to outlast the people who built it. The ironwork was intricate, geometric patterns, almost Art Deco, repeating chevrons and long vertical lines, not rusted, paint-stained. Beyond the gate, the headlights caught a gravel drive, raked, neat. Calloway stopped the truck. He got out. From his coat pocket, he produced a key. He unlocked the gate, pushed it open. It swung smoothly, no protest, well-oiled hinges, and came back to the truck. They drove through. He stopped, got back out, locked the gate behind them. Mirabel sat very still. The drive curved around a stand of pine and opened into a wide, flat clearing. And there was the house. She hadn't known what she expected. A cabin, probably. Logs and a porch and a wood stove. Something appropriate for a man in a frayed flannel shirt who drove a truck with electrical taped mirrors and communicated in single syllables. This was not a cabin. House, if house was even the right word, was a long, low structure of gray stone and dark timber, stretched wide across the back of the clearing like it had grown there. 2 wings, stone chimneys at both ends, both showing smoke. A covered porch that ran the full length of the facade, with timber columns and a porch swing that was rocking gently in the cold wind. Behind the main structure she could see a separate building, a workshop or a barn, and beyond that lights. Small, distant amber points in the tree line, too low to be stars. She didn't move. Calloway cut the engine and got out. He began unloading the crates from the bed without any apparent interest in her reaction. The gravel crunched under his boots, his breath made small clouds in the cold air. "What is this?" Mirabel said. He didn't answer right away. He set a crate down on the porch steps and straightened up, rolling his shoulder. "The house," he said. "This is your property." "Yes." She got out of the truck. The cold hit her like a wall, the kind of cold that lives at elevation, dense and serious. Her wet socks tightened against her feet. She looked at the house, then at the man in the frayed flannel shirt, then at the house again. "You manage timber," she said slowly. She was trying to reconstruct the conversation in the employment office. "That's what you said. Among other things." "Among what other things?" Calloway picked up the second crate. "I'll show you the house. I want to know what other things." He stopped, set the crate down again, turned to look at her with those flat gray eyes, and she saw something flicker in them. Not irritation, not amusement, something more calculating than either. He was measuring something. "You'll find out," he said. "Come inside. Your feet are wet." She hadn't told him her feet were wet. She stood in the cold for another 5 seconds out of pure stubbornness, then followed him up the porch steps. The interior was warm. Radiant heat floors, she realized later, which explained the particular quality of the warmth. It rose from the ground up, instead of falling from the ceiling down. The main room was open, with exposed timber beams overhead and a stone fireplace along the interior wall that was taller than Mirabel and wide enough to park a car in. The fire in it was burning low, indicating it had been lit hours ago, remotely or by someone else. The furniture was plain but not cheap. heavy leather, dark wood, wool blankets folded over armrests. Bookshelves on both sides of the fireplace, floor to ceiling, actual books, not decorative ones, their spines softened from handling. A kitchen visible, beyond an open arch, stainless steel and stone countertop, the kind of kitchen where things actually got cooked. There was no clutter, no dishes in the sink, no personal items on the surfaces. It looked like a place that was very carefully tended and completely unlived in. Calloway set the crates on the kitchen counter. He filled a kettle without asking if she wanted anything. Bedrooms down the hall, second door. Bathroom across from it. The hot water takes a few minutes. He moved to a cabinet and opened it, revealing shelves stocked with organized precision. Canned goods, dry goods, everything labeled and dated. Inventory sheets are in the binder on the counter. Your job is to keep it current and put in orders weekly. I'll show you the system tomorrow. Why does a man who lives alone need a full-time housekeeper? The kettle pinged. He poured without turning around. I'm not always here. Where do you go? Other properties. How many? He set a mug on the counter near her. Steam rose from it. Drink that. You're starting to shake. She looked down. He was right. A fine, involuntary tremor had worked its way into her hands. She picked up the mug. Chamomile, she discovered, which surprised her. She would have bet on black coffee, and drank it standing at the counter, watching him unload the crates with the same methodical efficiency he applied to everything. She was angry, and she didn't know entirely why. She thought it was about the house, the gate, the obvious, glaring, enormous gap between what this man had presented himself as and what he actually was. She'd gotten into a truck for 8 hours, let her feet go wet and her back go stiff, eaten the granola bar she'd had in her coat pocket because he hadn't offered her food and she hadn't asked, and the whole time he had this waiting at the end of the road. You could have warned me, she said. About what? About. She gestured at the room, the kitchen, the shelves, the stone fireplace visible through the arch, the whole impossible preposterousness of it. This. Calloway leaned against the counter with his own mug and looked at her with that same measuring quality. He didn't look apologetic. He didn't look amused. Would it have changed whether you came? No, she admitted. Then there was nothing to warn you about. She wanted to throw the chamomile at him. She went to find the bedroom instead. She lasted 4 days before she demanded an explanation. She had spent those 4 days learning the systems of the house, which were numerous, logical, and clearly designed by someone who believed that if something was worth doing, it was worth building infrastructure around. There were binders, multiple binders organized by category, supply inventory, equipment maintenance schedules, contact information for the satellite provider, for the fuel delivery service, for the water system filter schedule, everything annotated in a handwriting that was small, precise, and not Calloway's. She'd seen him write a note once. His letters were large and slightly tilted, nothing like the neat small print in the binders. She ordered supplies. She maintained inventory. She cooked because there was a kitchen and she was a competent cook, and the alternative was eating canned soup for every meal. She found that Calloway ate whatever she made without comment and washed his own dishes and was gone before she was awake and back after dark every day, smelling of pine sap and something mineral. She did not find out what the amber lights in the tree line were. On the 4th evening, she was in the main room reading when he came in. He washed up at the kitchen sink. She could hear the water, the particular sound of him scrubbing his hands, which he always did thoroughly, the way someone does when they have something more than ordinary dirt to remove. He came through the arch and stopped. You haven't looked at the lower building, he said. It wasn't a question. You haven't offered to show me. I'm offering now. She put down her book and followed him outside. The cold was sharper at night. The sky up here was unreal, black and dense with stars, no light pollution to thin them out. She tilted her head back for a moment, involuntarily, before she caught herself and followed Calloway across the clearing. The lower building was larger than it looked from the porch. It had wide sliding doors, the kind used for equipment, and a smaller entrance cut into the side. He used a key, a different key from the gate key, and pushed the door open. Inside was lit, warm. It smelled of machine oil and something that took her a moment to identify. Copper, cold and sharp, slightly metallic. The room was long. Along the right wall were shelves of equipment, organized with the same precision as the kitchen binders. In the center, a workbench, and at the far end, behind a heavy interior door, also locked, was the source of the amber lights she had seen from the clearing. She could see them through the small window set into that door. Rows of them, soft, warm, steady. Not electric lights, lamps, she realized, and under them racks. Long, narrow racks with something on them. "What is that?" she asked. Calloway came to stand beside her at the window. "Lumber," he said. "Specialty cuts. Figured maple, primarily. Some walnut." He paused. "The drying process takes 18 months. It has to be monitored. Temperature, humidity, the lights regulate the environment." She stared at the racks, at the slow, steady amber glow. "You're drying wood. I'm aging it. For instrument makers. Luthiers." He said the word without any particular pride, just as information. "Guitar makers, violin makers. High-end. Custom. There's a waiting list." He turned away from the window. "That's where the money comes from. The timber operation covers the land costs. The lumber operation is." He paused. "The rest." Mirabel stood at the small window, looking at the amber-lit racks of figured maple drying slowly in the precise warmth of a building in the middle of nowhere. And she thought about the frayed flannel shirt and the electrical tape on the mirror and the cracked linoleum at the employment office. She turned to face him. "You came to Haskell in that truck," she said. "Looking like that. I go to town sometime. Dressed like that. Those are my clothes. Calloway." She waited until he looked at her. "You have a house with radiant heat floors and a controlled aging facility for specialty tonewoods, and you drove me 8 hours in a truck held together with electrical tape and let me eat one granola bar the whole day." He held her gaze. His was, as always, level and unreadable. "You needed a job," he said. "That is not the point I'm making." He was quiet. He looked away from her, back toward the amber window. In the warm glow from the drying room, his face looked less closed than usual, the lines in it more visible, something underneath the flatness that might have been something else entirely. "I had someone before you," he said. 3 years ago. I hired through a proper agency. Nice resume. Good references." He turned back. His jaw was doing the thing it did when he was choosing words with particular care. "She was here 11 weeks. When I went to the coast for a supplier meeting, she had a locksmith come up from town. She copied 3 keys and let in 2 men she'd brought with her. They took equipment from this room worth $30,000. He paused. "And the binders." Mirabel absorbed this. The binders, client contacts. Order history. 18 years of supplier relationships. He looked at the window again. "I rebuilt it. It took 2 years." She stood in the cold, low light of the workshop and looked at the side of his face and felt the anger in her chest do something complicated. It didn't go away. It shifted, made room for something more inconvenient. "So you let me think you were broke," she said. "I let you decide to come, based on the job, not the house. That's not the same as what you just said." "No," he admitted. "It's not." She let the silence sit. "The granola bar, though," she finally said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. "Not exactly. I didn't know you only had one. You didn't ask?" "No." He turned fully toward her. The small light from the window caught the side of his face, the gray of his eyes going briefly warmer in it, something surface shifting. "I didn't." They walked back to the house in silence, the stars enormous overhead, the cold doing its serious business around them. On the porch steps, Calloway stopped and held the door open for her. She went past him into the warmth. He followed and set the deadbolt with the same finality she'd noticed the first night. She went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. He sat down at the table. "The supply order I put in today," she said, getting mugs down. "The flour you had was old. I doubled the order and added cornmeal. The binder didn't have it. The binder probably should. I updated it." He nodded slowly. He was watching her move around the kitchen with an attention that was different from how he usually watched things, not assessing, not calculating, just watching. "The drying room," she said. "Is the humidity log something I should be tracking?"
"Ideally. Show me the system tomorrow."
He nodded again. She poured the tea and set his mug on the table in front of him and took her own to the counter. Outside, the wind had come up and was moving through the pines with a sound like something breathing. "Calloway." He looked up from his mug. If you wanted to know if you could trust me, she said, you could have just asked. He was quiet for a moment. The wind moved in the pines. The fire in the other room ticked and settled. You'd have said yes, he said. Probably. Everyone says yes. She looked at him. He looked back at her with those pale, serious, complicated eyes that had been flat for so many days, and were now in the warm light of the kitchen at the end of a long evening, something she didn't quite have a word for yet. Then you already know I might say yes, she said, and you brought me up here anyway. His thumb moved slowly around the rim of the mug. Yes, so you've already decided something. He didn't answer, but he didn't look away. Mirabel took a sip of her tea. It was too hot. She drank it anyway. The cornmeal, she said after a moment. I'm going to make skillet cornbread this week. If that's a problem, say so now. It's not a problem, Calloway said. Good. She set her mug down. And next time you go to the coast, I'd like 48 hours notice, not 8. He looked at her. One long, deliberate look. Then, fair. She picked up her book from the counter where she'd left it and walked toward the hall. At the arch, she stopped, not turning around. The binders, she said, I'm going to digitize them. Backed up in 3 places, nobody is doing that to you again. The kitchen was quiet behind her. Mirabel, he said. She turned. He was still sitting at the table, both hands around his mug, the firelight low and amber warm behind him. He looked like a man who had spent a very long time being careful and was finding the weight of it difficult to calculate against something else entirely. Thank you, he said. Just that. She nodded once. She went down the hall to her room. She lay in the dark for a long time, listening to the wind work through the pines, listening to the far-off creak of the house settling around her. In the morning there would be inventory to update and a system to learn and cornbread to make. There would be more silence and more cold and more of those pale, watchful eyes she was beginning to understand had not gone flat from emptiness, but from the particular discipline of a person who had learned to keep everything important very still, very controlled, and very close to the center. She was not afraid of this place. That surprised her. She was not afraid of him. That surprised her more. She thought about the amber light through the small window in the workshop, about wood that took 18 months to become what it was supposed to be, about how the thing being made from it, the guitar, the violin, the instrument that would eventually live in someone's hands and make something, had no idea it was in the process of becoming anything at all. It was just wood, in the warmth, in the controlled light, changing slowly from what it was into what it was going to be. She closed her eyes. The wind pressed against the stone walls of the house and found no way through.